I always believed Marcus Reed and I had a solid relationship, one of those that could weather the passage of time and life's storms, where trust flowed like air and respect was simply assumed. No daily promises needed. We shared routines, big decisions, and even the comfortable silences of the weekend. There were never jealous outbursts or suspicious glances. We were the kind of couple others envied for our apparent harmony. I thought I knew every corner of his soul, every gesture, and every pause in his breathing. But stability, as I would later learn, does not always mean truth. That morning was nothing out of the ordinary. He showered early, made his black coffee just the way he liked it, and left with a quick kiss, saying he was expected at the office. He was wearing his favorite charcoal suit, the one he wore for important meetings, and he drove off in the company sedan, as he did every weekday. The final slam of the door had no double meaning. There was no distinct look or change in the tone of his voice. For me, it was simply another day in our perfectly timed routine. I had no idea I was about to discover an irreparable crack. While organizing the house, I walked into the garage and saw our personal SUV covered in dust. Its tires were static, and the windshield was opaque with neglect, as if time had stopped inside it. I thought it would be a nice gesture to clean it up, a surprise for him, a way to remind him that even the small details mattered to me. I found the cleaning supplies, carefully opened the doors, and started checking every corner, shaking out old memories embedded in the seats. I felt genuinely happy, imagining his smile when he saw it gleaming again. But what I found had nothing to do with joy. As I wiped the dashboard with a damp cloth, I opened the glove compartment without thinking, just to empty and clean it thoroughly. Tucked between old registration papers and a pack of stale gum, I saw a box of condoms perfectly sealed with no signs of having been opened. I recognized them instantly, a brand we had never used. My fingers froze instantly, as if the contact with that object burned me from the inside. My breath caught in my throat, and the world seemed to fall silent around me. I stood motionless with the box in my hands, as if the simple act of holding it was a betrayal in itself. We had gone years without using protection since we decided to try for a second child, though it never happened. It made no sense for him to have them, much less new ones, hidden away like a secret from another life. A sharp physical pang shot through my chest, and I felt something break inside me without warning. It was a silent but devastating revelation. I slammed the glove compartment shut with a sudden, jarring movement, as if doing so could erase what I had seen, as if the dry sound of the latch could serve as a denial. I backed away from the SUV, trembling, my legs numb, and my stomach twisted into knots. My mind went blank. No words, no questions, just a dull, constant roar in my chest. I leaned against the garage wall, unable to comprehend how something so small could cause such intense pain. I couldn't even cry. It was too soon to understand what it meant. For hours, I repeated to myself that there had to be a logical, innocent, even clumsy explanation. Maybe they were old, forgotten, bought by mistake, some absurd, unimportant gesture of precaution. I clung to any possibility that did not involve infidelity, because the alternative was too agonizing to consider. I forced myself to continue cleaning, even though my hands were shaking and my eyes were blurry with unshed tears. It was easier to lie to myself than to accept the truth. But deep down, something screamed at me that I could no longer hide from the facts, that this box was an open door to a betrayal that had been ongoing for some time. The way it was stored, the neatness of the hiding spot, the fact that he said nothing, it all fit together like pieces of a puzzle I refused to assemble. This wasn't remnants of the past or innocent oversights. This was recent, premeditated, carefully concealed, and I could no longer close my eyes to it. I went back inside without saying a word, like a ghost shuffling her feet, my face pale and my gaze lost. I sat on the sofa in the same corner where we had watched movies cuddled up countless times, and let the tears fall uncontrollably. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I just cried silently, as if the pain was afraid to make noise. The hours passed, and I stayed there, still hugging my anguish with crossed arms. No one saw me break on the inside. From that day on, something fractured in the way I looked at him, as if his eyes were no longer the same, as if his smile hid something murky underneath. I started observing him from a distance, making a mental note of every excuse, every glance at his cell phone, every gesture that had previously gone unnoticed. He was no longer my life partner, but a stranger pretending to be. And I, Lauren Carter, who had always been transparent with him, now learned to keep silent, because something within me had awakened. I went to a local spice shop near our neighborhood and bought a packet of dried habanero chili peppers, the kind that burned just from touching them. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do, but something pushed me to act, to not sit there watching myself be destroyed. Back at home, I calmly crushed the chilies, feeling the burn in my eyes like a necessary punishment. I did it without tears, without trembling, like someone preparing poison with a surgeon's precision. It was a cold decision, but it was mine. With latex gloves I found under the bathroom sink, I opened the box of condoms with the same care one uses to defuse a bomb. One by one, I filled them with that infernal powder, making sure each one was thoroughly coated in heat. I sealed them meticulously, leaving no fingerprints, altering nothing that could raise suspicion. It was an act of silent surgical revenge, with no need for words or confrontation. I didn't want justice. I wanted it to hurt. I returned to the SUV, opened the glove compartment gently, and placed the box in the exact same position I had found it, as if I had never touched it. I closed the door softly and took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. I made sure to leave no traces, to move nothing else to avoid disturbing the scene. This wasn't a threat. It was a silent promise. If he was going to betray me, at least he wouldn't do it without consequence. That night, I greeted him with a serene, even tender smile, as if nothing had changed, as if I was still the woman who waited lovingly for him every day. I cooked his favorite meal, lit a few candles, and listened intently to his office stories while nodding silently. Inside, rage and sadness crossed like sharp knives, but I didn't let it show. I had learned to fake it better than I ever imagined. I was an actress in my own home. Slowly, the excuses began. Impromptu meetings, urgent deliverables, bosses asking him to stay late. He said these things without looking me in the eye, as if the guilt was already beginning to weigh on him, though not enough to stop. He spoke quickly with short phrases, and a hurry he hadn't had before. Every word reinforced what I already knew. But I continued to listen with feigned understanding. He thought I saw nothing, and that gave him security. The following days became a sequence of increasingly long absences, delayed message responses, and missed calls without explanation. He came home late, smelling of perfumes that weren't mine, and avoided physical contact, as if my closeness bothered him. He started leaving his cell phone silent, face down with a clumsy caution that only confirmed his deception. I watched him from afar, mentally logging every sign. Patience had become my best weapon. One afternoon, armed with courage and my heart pounding in my throat, I decided to follow him quietly, keeping my car at a safe distance. It didn't take long for him to lead me to the truth. I watched him park in front of a discreet mid-tier independent hotel, the Maplewood Suites, and step out with a sure stride, accompanied by a blonde woman. She was laughing, touching him as if he were hers, and he didn't hide, as if this cheating didn't even merit discretion. I stayed inside my car, watching the scene with contained tears. There was no longer any room for doubt. When she turned her head, my world collapsed. She wasn't a stranger. She was Brooke Langford, his office colleague, the same one who had been in our home on more than one occasion. We had shared dinners, holiday parties, even intimate chats about life. I felt stabbed twice, once by him and once by her. This was no longer just infidelity. It was a betrayal in the form of a cruel play. And the worst part was that both of them had performed it in front of me. They weren't just betraying me, but also her husband, Noah Whitaker. a kind man who had always greeted me with respect when we crossed paths. Everything was an interwoven web of lies, a double life built on our backs without any shame. I realized they shared more than desire. They shared secrets, plans, and hours stolen from our families. What began as suspicion now revealed itself as an unbearable certainty. The pain had names and faces. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I knew my moment hadn't arrived yet. I simply watched, recording every gesture, every knowing glance, understanding that very soon everything would fall under its own weight. The trap was already set, and there was no way to avoid it. I became a spectator of my own vengeance, letting fate run its course without intervening, because sometimes silence screams louder than any word. That morning, he showered with extra care, chose a brand new shirt, and put on a cologne he had never worn with me. He studied himself in the mirror intently, like a teenager getting ready for a date, and left the house with a smile that no longer belonged to me. I watched him from the doorway, with the calm of someone who no longer expected anything. I knew exactly where he was going, with whom, and what awaited him. I said nothing. I just waited. That evening, while eating alone in the kitchen, my cell phone rang with an unknown number. I hesitated to answer. On the other end, a frantic feminine voice, sobbing through words cut short by fear, asked if I was Marcus's wife. My heart accelerated like an internal alarm, knowing that what was coming wasn't good. "Something horrible has happened," she said without needing further explanation. The chaos had begun and my trap had taken effect. It was her, Brooke, the hysterical mistress, screaming that he was in the hotel bathroom, that something had caused him unbearable pain. Her voice cracked as she recounted that after using one of the condoms, he started screaming, writhing, and begging for help without understanding what was happening. She was asking me for advice as if I could calm her disaster. I just listened, cold, without compassion, letting her desperation return a bit of my dignity to me. There was justice in his pain. She told me that shortly after the act, he started screaming in agony, saying he felt fire in his groin, that something was burning him from the inside. They tried to rinse it off in the hotel shower, but it didn't help. The irritation worsened by the minute. She didn't understand what was happening, and he was blaming her, yelling like a lunatic while dressing as best he could. I imagined the scene with an almost cruel calmness, knowing exactly what had caused it all. It wasn't madness. It was justice in the form of searing heat. They rushed out of the hotel in the middle of the night, clothes askew, wrapped in shame and desperation, while the desk clerk stared at them in bewilderment. They had to go urgently to the emergency room where he arrived, wailing, and she didn't know what to explain. They invented a story about an allergic reaction, but no one believed it. They examined him instantly while other patients in the waiting area looked on curiously. The humiliation was no longer a secret. The doctors were clear. There were severe chemical irritations caused by an external agent, likely in direct contact with mucous membranes. They asked if he had used any product or substance before intimate contact, but he didn't know what to say. She remained silent, pale, suspecting something she didn't dare utter. The doctor repeated that it was an intentional, not accidental reaction. And at that moment, they understood this was no simple mistake. In less than 48 hours, the story had slipped into every corner of the office, mixed with laughter, exaggeration, and whispers in the hallways. No one knew the exact details, but everyone was talking about the incident at the hotel, the ER visit, the pain, the exposed affair. Some told it with mockery, others with morbid curiosity, and still others with poorly disguised indignation. The news became unstoppable, a fireball that was destroying reputations. What had been a secret was now a full-blown scandal. Colleagues barely hid their laughter when he walked down the hallways with a look of defeat, trying to fake normalcy. Eyes met. Conversation stopped when he entered, and Brooke avoided showing up at the office altogether. The atmosphere became toxic with constant gossip and rumors reaching even management. What was once professional respect turned into collective ridicule. Both of them had lost more than dignity. They lost control of their narrative. Corporate HR and management didn't take long to intervene. They called both of them into a private meeting where they were informed that their behavior had damaged the team's image. There was no room for explanations or apologies. The decision was already made. In less than 1 week, both were out with termination letters and faces sunken in shame. What had started as an adventure had become a professional catastrophe. No one intervened on their behalf. From being considered an exemplary executive, a family man, respected and trustworthy, he became the object of ridicule among everyone who knew him. People whispered in coffee shops, at the gym, even at the children's school, and he couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes boring into his back. His reputation completely crumbled with no possibility of public redemption. He was no longer the confident man who left every morning in an impeccable suit. He was a broken shadow of who he once was. One night, when he finally dared to look me in the eyes, he tried to deny everything, as if he still had some chance of escaping the abyss. I asked him directly if he had used one of the condoms from the SUV, and the ensuing silence was the only answer I needed. I told him I already knew everything, that I had seen him with her, that I had listened to the call. His face changed color, first pale, then red with anger, but he said nothing because he no longer had a defense. After a few minutes of unbearable tension, he broke down in tears, murmuring that he had been with her for months, that he hadn't wanted to hurt me, that he had just gotten carried away. His words were hollow, cowardly, utterly lacking nobility. He spoke of confusion, mistakes, and not knowing what he felt, but I was no longer listening. I only saw a man destroyed by his own choices. His confession did not bring me relief. It only confirmed that there was nothing left between us. I discovered, in addition, that he had used part of our savings to buy her gifts, pay for weekends away, and even reserve spa treatments. He had invested our family's money in feeding a lie while I was juggling bills to make the monthly budget work. Seeing the bank statements was like taking another blow to the stomach, one that no longer brought tears, only pure rage. This was not a simple mistake. It was a meticulous, conscious betrayal, impossible to forgive. Our marriage had rotted from the inside out. I locked myself in the bathroom, hands shaking, looking at my reflection with a mixture of fury and sadness I had never felt before. I screamed without making a sound, clenching my teeth until they hurt, because I knew I couldn't let him see how much he was destroying me. I didn't break anything. I didn't throw objects because that rage deserved something more than noise. It deserved control. If he had played dirty, I would not sink to the same level. I no longer wanted to save anything. I only wanted to free myself. After thinking about it for several days, I looked up her husband, Noah Whitaker, on LinkedIn, knowing that he too deserved to know the truth. I wrote him a short, direct message without drama, offering to talk if he felt it was necessary. He quickly replied, sounding incredulous, asking for more details in a calm yet broken tone. We agreed to meet on a local park bench at Riverside Commons Park, where there would be no noise or witnesses. We were going to share the same wound from different sides. When I told him everything, he didn't interrupt even once. He just lowered his head and remained silent for several minutes, as if processing every word was agonizing. He thanked me for my honesty, though his voice sounded hollow, as if something had been torn out of him. He didn't cry, but in his eyes was a defeat impossible to disguise. We sat without speaking for a long time, sharing that pain without needing to explain it further. He was grateful that I hadn't stayed silent. That same night, upon returning home, I quietly prepared the divorce papers without pause or doubt. I collected all the documents I had as evidence, including photos, messages, and bank transaction logs. There was nothing to think about because our marriage had ended long before I knew it. I left everything on the dining table in silence while he pretended to sleep on the sofa. The next day, I went to the courthouse without looking back. When he received the notification, he came running after me, crying, begging for another chance, promising to change, swearing it would never happen again. He hugged me from behind as if that gesture could erase months of lies and humiliation. I asked him to let go without raising my voice and told him I no longer believed him. There was no hatred, only an icy calm that completely unnerved him. I was no longer the broken woman. I was the survivor. Shortly after, I learned that Brooke's husband, Noah, had also initiated divorce proceedings, giving her no option to explain herself. She tried to justify everything as an emotional mistake, but he no longer wanted to listen. She had lost not only her marriage, but also the respect of her children, her friends, and her professional circle. The fall was as swift as it was deserved. Now both of them were alone, facing the consequences of their decisions. What started as a hidden affair ended in the total ruin of 2 homes, leaving confused children, empty schedules, and broken promises scattered on the floor. The house became a silent battlefield full of soulless objects and memories that no longer served a purpose. The shared laughter, the family dinners, it all felt like an old movie that no longer made sense. The echo of who we were still resonated in the walls, but I no longer belonged to that past. The divorce process moved quickly, thanks to the amount of evidence I provided and his lack of opposition. He didn't contest the division of assets or the custody of the children, perhaps because he knew he had no way to defend himself. He signed every paper with trembling hands, not daring to look directly at me. I attended every appointment with my head held high, refusing to let the pain make me retreat. It was the final stage of a story I hadn't written. The hardest part was explaining it to the children, finding the right words without destroying their image of their father, without planting hatred in their young hearts. They cried. They asked why. They tried to find culprits where there were none. I told them the truth without details, just enough for them to understand that it wasn't their fault. Seeing their eyes full of sadness was 1,000 times worse than any betrayal. It was then I knew I had to stay strong for them. In the neighborhood, rumors were already spreading like wildfire, mixing truth with invention with that cruel tone people adopt when they are bored with their own lives. The curious glances at the grocery store, the conversations that stopped when I walked in. Everything spoke louder than words. I knew some were enjoying the scandal while others feigned sympathy. I kept my head high. Even though all I wanted was to disappear, the shame was no longer mine, it was theirs. I moved into a small apartment without luxury or comfort, but with something I hadn't had for a long time: peace. I slept alone in a cold bed, listening to the sounds of the building as if they were part of a new life I didn't yet understand. Sometimes the silence hurt more than the screams we never had, but at least there were no more lies. Every corner of the new home was mine, without outside shadows, without stolen perfumes. I was starting over, even if I didn't know where to begin. As the days passed, I realized that the guilt I had swallowed for so long was not mine. I hadn't destroyed anything. I was only picking up the pieces he broke with his choices. I learned not to justify his betrayal, not to look for answers where there were none. I began to forgive myself for having trusted, for having loved without reservation. I wasn't weak. I had just been honest in a world full of pretense. The months felt slow at first, as if each day weighed double, but eventually the wounds began to close without haste, but without pause, like skin regenerating after a burn. I learned to live alone, to enjoy my own company, to not need external validation. I started reading again, cooking for myself, and breathing without anxiety. Time, that silent enemy, became my best ally. One afternoon, I received a message from Brooke's ex-husband, Noah, asking how I was doing. No ulterior motive, just genuine empathy. We started talking occasionally without drama, without lamenting, sharing small things about our daily lives. We weren't looking for solace, only mutual understanding. It was strange how someone who shared my same wound could be so easy to talk to. Sometimes you just need someone to understand without having to explain everything. Our conversations became more frequent, lighter, more natural, as if we had found a refuge in the midst of the shipwreck. We talked about our kids, work, good days and bad days, without needing to fake strength. We supported each other from a distance, without pressure, without expectations. We were neither friends nor anything more, just two wounded souls walking in the same direction. And in that fragile balance, something new began to sprout. Life continued its course, as it always does, and each of us rebuilt our path in our own way. I advanced professionally. I became more confident, more decisive, less naive. He also reconstructed his routine, focusing on his children and his emotional well-being, far from his past. For a while, we stopped talking. Not out of anger, but because life led us down different paths. But something inside me knew it wasn't a definitive goodbye. We ran into each other by chance at a school event. Years later, surrounded by parents, noise, and distant memories. It was a glance first, then a shy greeting, and finally a long conversation on a bench in the courtyard. Time had not erased what we lived through, but it had healed the rawest parts. We were no longer the same, and that made everything easier. There was respect in his eyes, and that was enough. At one point, our eyes met in a different way, without weight, without sadness, just with a calmness we hadn't known before. It was as if the past stood behind us, watching in silence, but not interrupting. Neither of us said anything special, but both of us knew something had shifted. It wasn't physical attraction or nostalgia. It was something deeper. The look of two people who finally recognize each other. We stayed talking for hours without rushing, as if everything that went unsaid for years finally found its place. There were no reproaches or uncomfortable questions, just stories, soft laughter, and comfortable silences. We shared what we had learned, what we had let go of, what we no longer needed. He told me about his fears. I told him about my scars. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly heard. As the weeks went by, we started seeing each other more frequently. First for coffee, then for quiet walks in the park. There were no promises or long-term plans, just the natural ease of being together without masks or distrust. Trust grew without us even noticing, nourished by respect, transparency, and silent complicity. We didn't need labels or justifications. We just knew that being together felt right. Without realizing it, we moved from simple encounters to seeking excuses to see each other, as if destiny were gently pushing us toward common ground. There was no romantic declaration or dramatic moment, only small gestures that paved the way. A coffee that stretched longer, a walk without checking the clock, a smile that lingered longer than normal. Everything was simple, but filled with a new tenderness. It was the silent beginning of something neither of us expected. With the passing of the days, our conversations became deeper, more personal, as if each word removed a weight from the past. We laughed without guilt, shared memories without pain, and every silence became comfortable, not tense. There was a complicity we weren't looking for, but which appeared on its own, natural, effortless. I felt that I could finally be myself, without fear of being betrayed. And he too seemed to breathe more freely by my side. One afternoon, while walking downtown, he stopped in front of a bookstore and took my hand without saying anything. It was a simple gesture, yet so full of meaning that I felt a lump in my throat. I didn't let go of his hand for a second because I understood that this was more honest than any word. We didn't need to talk about love. We were building it with actions. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to move forward. That night, upon arriving home, the fear returned like an old whisper, reminding me of everything I had lost before. I doubted. I wondered if it was worth risking my heart again, if I would be able to withstand another disappointment. But something inside me, stronger than the wound, told me that this time was different. Not because he was perfect, but because I was no longer the same. And I decided to trust my instinct. We started a relationship without labels, without long-term plans, only with the certainty that we deserved something healthy, something real. We didn't hide from the past, but we also didn't allow it to dictate our present. Every encounter was a small celebration of what we had survived, of what we were building from respect. It wasn't about replacement. It was about starting over with awareness. It was an adult love without empty promises. In time, we learned to live with our scars, to even laugh at what once hurt. Our love wasn't perfect, but it was firm, patient, and full of honesty. There were no games, no secrets, no fear of asking what we previously kept silent. We knew what it meant to lose everything, and so we valued every gesture, every detail. We had found something we weren't looking for, a love that healed instead of broke. One day, without planning it, we decided not to talk about those who betrayed us again. Not out of cowardice, but because they no longer held power over our lives. The pain had become learning, and the names of the past were now just part of an old story. We focused on the good, what we learned, what we overcame, and what was reborn. The resentment left, and with it, the weight we had been carrying. I never sought revenge, but life took care of dealing it out in its own way. They were left alone, without credibility, without a home, trapped in their own lie. And we, without having planned it, ended up together, rebuilt, strong, and dignified. What began as a betrayal ended up uniting two lives that would never have crossed paths otherwise. It was as if the universe, after breaking us, decided to reward us not for what we lost, but for what we resisted. Today I know that the pain was not the end, but the beginning of a stronger version of myself. I learned that even from the worst betrayal, a true love can be born, one that doesn't ask for permission, but gives everything with sincerity. I don't regret anything, because every tear brought me here. And if I had to go through it all again to get to this moment, I would do it without hesitation, because in the end I survived and I loved again. We started making simple plans without fear, as if we were rediscovering the world from a small but luminous corner. A weekend getaway, an impromptu dinner, a walk with the children at sunset. Every moment felt clean, without the weight of the unsaid. We didn't need grand gestures, just truth. Happiness, I realized, sometimes looks more like tranquility than excitement. I caught myself smiling naturally, without the guilt of the past or the anguish of the future. I was no longer waiting for someone to save me or fill voids. I had learned to be complete, and that made all the difference. Love, when it arrives after pain, has a different flavor, less naive, firmer, more conscious. I didn't idealize what we had, but I valued it as if it were a treasure. The children also began to heal. It wasn't immediate, but time, stable routine, and constant love did their part. They saw a strong mother in me, and little by little they stopped asking painful questions. Noah also gave them space without invading, but by being present. And although the past didn't disappear, it was no longer an open wound. It was just another page in our story. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I saw him playing with his daughter in the living room, laughing as if nothing else mattered. It was then I knew I had chosen well. Not because of what he offered me, but because of what he awakened in me. Calm, trust, truth. I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable with him. And that, for someone who had been betrayed, was the greatest victory. Months passed, and everything flowed with a naturalness that was at times startling. Sometimes the silence of health is stranger than the noise of chaos. But I grew used to not expecting disappointment, to not preparing excuses, to simply living. I didn't want perfection. I just wanted presence. And finally, I had it without asking, without begging. One night, in the middle of a mundane conversation, he told me that he admired me for having survived everything without becoming bitter. I was silent for a few seconds because I had never thought of it that way. But maybe he was right. I hadn't allowed the pain to define me. I had chosen not to hate, not to drag the broken pieces, not to seek vengeance beyond what was fair. I had chosen to love again. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't promise eternities or write futures in stone. We only know that today we are here whole, with scars that no longer hurt, and that is enough. Sometimes life doesn't give you second chances, but it gives you unexpected beginnings. And this one, ours, is the most unexpected of all. So yes, I survived. They broke me. I lied to myself. I stood up with rage, and I rebuilt myself with tenderness. And in the end, without seeking it, without planning it, I loved again. But this time, from a place of truth, of calm, and above all, from myself. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.